Hello, everyone out there. My name is Kevin Griffin. Welcome to the Swift Kick Show. I am joined today by my very special guest, Kevin Jones. How are you today, Kevin?
Not bad yourself.
I am hanging in there. So I have had the opportunity to know Kevin for wow. How long have we known each other?
I
10,
think
15
we,
years?
I was gonna say we bumped into each other, and I think was it Richmond Code Camp,
It must have been, yeah.
like somewhere like 2006 or seven, something like that. I think it's been about 10 years.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing how the time flies.
Yeah.
Let me bring up my fancy smanchy slides, which I happen to have this week. Usually I don't have the slides. So, again, welcome to everyone out there who's watching. And if you're watching this on a replay on YouTube or on Twitch, sorry that you missed the live show, but we do this live every other week. At least we try to. You can catch new episodes by going to swiftkick.in. That's our webpage, and you can find out what's coming up. So a little bit about SwiftKick. We are a software training and consulting company. I'm based out of Chesapeake, Virginia, but we work with a national U.S. audience and sometimes international clients, depending on the work that needs to get done. But you are not here for a sales pitch, so I'm just going to move on to what we are going to talk about in future episodes of the SwiftKick show. And the next one here on October 3rd is going to be Mr. Steve Albers, who I think, Kevin, you know Steve. He's up
Yeah.
in your neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be talking about picking your next web framework. I'm not quite sure what that means. Steve has come back to me and said he wants to have more of a discussion about web frameworks, not so much a presentation. So that should be a pretty interesting episode. After that, we have Mr. Sidney Andrews, who's probably going to talk about something Azure related. And he was on the show about a year ago, and he talked about Cosmos DB up on Azure. So I'm pretty sure Sydney's going to talk about something Azure. And after that, we have Miss Jenna Carlton. Jenna is a lovely person who I met at Revolution Conf this past year, and she was very welcoming when I invited her onto the show. I'm not sure what she's going to talk about yet, but we'll find out soon. We should have another show in between Steve and Sydney. I just don't know what it's going to be yet, which also opens the question that if you're interested on being on the Swift Kick show, you want to try out a new talk, you just want to talk about whatever you're passionate about, just let me know. I'm on Twitter. I'll put all that information in the chat here in a moment. But without further ado, let's have a conversation with my very good friend Kevin Jones, and then I'll let him get on to his presentation, which is called Securing Your Customers. And this is what I've known most about Kevin for a long time, is that he is into security. And I think as long as I've known you, you've been working for different companies that really focus in security needs. But I could just sit here and guess. But why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and give us your origin story? How'd you get into technology and get to where you are today?
So, yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I mean, I kind of come and go for and bring security where it's needed. I think right around the time that you and I actually met is when I kind of started taking on a more permanent security position back in 2006 as the security lead for a company called Thycotic. Um, And, since then I've gone, in and out of some different consulting roles and helping some businesses get some things off the ground and then moving on to the next project. And I guess I really kind of started off as a software developer, like a lot of security-minded people do. And then you kind of realize, like, wait a second, we don't really know what we're doing here with security. Maybe I can actually kind of pivot more towards doing that. And that's kind of more what I want to talk about later today is just, how can we do more about this kind of stuff? And helping businesses get a better handle on how this kind of stuff works. So the most of the security stuff that I deal with is usually engineering level or architecturally level, occasionally policy kind of stuff, the paperworky kind of stuff that people don't like. But it's a necessity that needs to get done. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I mean, Most of the time, I've probably historically done a lot of stuff in the .NET space as well. Um, Not so much as of late. Most of the technology and tooling that I use is Ruby or Rust, which is fun. Um, but you know, security doesn't really care what framework or tools you use; it just needs to get done. So.
Not at all. So you made me think about where I first met you, and I think I remember your first presentation. Well, the first presentation I saw you give was when you were with Psychotic. You were doing a talk with
Jonathan?
Jonathan. You were doing pair programming with 2 keyboards.
Yeah.
And I remember that talk. I remember the room. I don't know why, but for some reason that talk stood out to me because it was the first pair programming talk I had ever seen before.
Yeah, that was Jonathan's talk, and then and Jonathan, one of his real core like ideologies for building Psychotic and the software behind it was pair programming, and that kind of harks back to the early aughts of extreme programming and agile when all that stuff started booming out, and we thought, well, what better way to talk about the values of pair programming than let's just get in front of a bunch of people and do it and see what they think.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I remember that very much. Did you all use 2 keyboards when you were doing your day work?
Yeah, so the way that it worked is we had a workstation set up, and we would sit across from each other at a table. And there'd be 2 monitors, one facing one person, one facing the other, and the screens would be mirrored. And 2 keyboards would be connected to the computer, 2 mice would be connected to the computer, which is fun because sometimes you kind of get into a control war. Like, I was like, oh, I can do this part really fast. And you're like, hey, just a second, I was in the middle of typing something. But yeah, that's how we did it. It kept people engaged to be able to do that kind of stuff. It was an interesting experience doing it that way.
It's like the analog version of Visual Studio Live Share. You're both looking at the same code, the same screen, everything, but you both have control.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The nice thing that Live Share in Google Docs for you though gives you is multiple cursors and multiple mice. With the same workstation, you did not get that. It was kind of funny. Like if you both move the mouse in opposite directions apart from each other really slowly, the mouse would just stay in the same place because they cancel each other out. So, yeah, it made it really nice to be able to have somebody just jump in and be able to help you. I mean, that was 2000, again, that was like 2005, 2006, and we were still on Windows XP. Google Docs and Live Share didn't exist yet.
Oh my gosh. Ooh. Wayback Machine. Well, let's switch gears a little. We can talk about technology all day long, but I'm really interested in what people do outside of technology. So what kind of hobbies do you have outside of your day job?
Probably learning more about my day job. No, that I do like doing that, but I don't know. You can tell that I have a lot of things to play with. I have my little Lego Voltron there. And that I spend a lot of time doing with my kid. We like doing little experiments and playing with Legos and exploring DC and finding new things. So yeah, I'm up in the DC area, so we'll go out and do something there. I would say that I'm also an amateur woodworker, getting there. Okay. Maybe. It's something my father did and something I kind of, when I was a kid, I didn't understand. And now that I understand the solitude of just working with wood and just, I don't know, getting a result out of it has been pretty fun. Wish I had more time for it, but time is usually my constraint. And, juggling that and Legos and, other responsibilities. Legos usually win.
I know what you mean. I like to do a little bit of woodworking when I can as well. It's funny. The more people I talk to, it's either musicians or woodworkers or crafters of some way, or makers is a better term. I am the same way. I would love to do it more, but usually it's a time constraint. Sometimes it's financial constraint because I want to go buy a new tool, but I don't
Yeah.
have the money to buy the new tool, and I'm like, ah, fine, I can't build this thing until I buy that tool.
Yeah.
So it never gets built.
Legos is an expensive hobby to have too. Like
It is.
they're fun, and I think they're worth the value. But I mean, I can't hit the Lego store every week, or I'm going to get yelled at.
No, we just finished. Well, I just finished the Saturn V rocket. That was my project, and I've been eyeing that Voltron. So maybe here in the next month or so, when I buy my next Lego kit, I might pick up that Voltron. That looked like a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, the nice thing about the Voltron is it comes with 5 instruction manuals instead of 1, so it makes it kind of fun to like have, like, if you have a family, you can have, say, okay, you get you can have the yellow lion, you can have the blue lion, you'll have the red lion, and you'll have the green lion. They all come with their discrete instruction books. So,
that's awesome.
So, because one of the things that's hard about Legos is working on it with people together.
Yeah.
Kind of like, well, you do this page and I'll do that page, but wait a second, I need your parts to do this page. So, this is a good family one, I think, and it's not too complicated, except for the center part of it is a little.
Very nice. So a couple folks out in chat. Hello, Joel. Hello, Raphael. How are you all today? Thank you for coming out. We've already taken a bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Let Kevin take over. And if you all have any questions at all, just put them in the chat. I'll interrupt Kevin when it's convenient. If not, we'll wait till the end to answer all your questions. But Kevin, go ahead and take over.
All right, let's set up screen sharing. We've got that. Oh, wait. I need to redo that. My apologies. I need to do the whole screen.
Yeah, let's not make that mistake.
All right. And then we just say...
Good.
Start. How's that look?
Responsibilities. We see it.
Okay, excellent. Oh, that brought Chrome back. All right, there we go. So I actually struggled a little bit with figuring out what I wanted to call this talk, because I think we've had a bit of an interesting revelations with software development and really product management and all these kinds of things around information security. And I've been thinking about it for 10, 15 years about software security and how we build things and the culture in which we build them. And I have a pretty solid idea of where I think we need to go as an industry, as a society. And to kind of take you on a quick mental journey with me, I'm going to start back to when computers were really their origin story of, computers were fun once. They were a nice hobby. You could play games on them. They were an amazing productivity tool as well. And they ushered in an era of convenience, which is really what I think the computer has always been about, has been convenience. And the first computers that we had, they had games, they had word processing. Word processing was an amazing thing to some people. Word processing gave you things like you could store huge amounts of text on, a 5 1/4 or 3.5 inch disk, and you no longer had to deal with a typewriter or ink ribbons or whiteout and mailing paper copies around for review. It was all completely software based. And it was kind of interesting growing up in a period of time with computers where it was acceptable to have them and also acceptable to not have them. So when I was a kid, like a young kid, like 4 or 5 years old, we had neighbors that had personal computers, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. But at no point was it like, wow, you have a computer. That's, you're probably the only person in the neighborhood that has one. I didn't have one myself until I was a teenager, or at least in our family. And that kind of highlighted an interesting aspect of computers at the time, which was they were a convenience tool that was convenient, but not a necessary convenience. The first computer that I ever actually had, I mean, just to kind of walk through convenience that computers give us a little bit, came with this big disk set. It was CDs of software called Encarta. Some of you may know what Encarta is, some of you don't. For those that don't know what Encarta is, Encarta was literally a encyclopedia on a disk. It was, at the time, an amazing convenience thing. You could put in these Encarta CDs in your computer, and you literally had an entire encyclopedia that would make up dozens of volumes in books right there on your computer. When I was a kid, I had no idea what a wombat looked like. And the only thing I could possibly go off of was cartoons that I saw on Cartoon Network. But I probably wasn't going to ask my parents to take me to the library because I really wanted to know what a wombat looked like. But now, with Encarta, I could simply just type in wombat and have a better idea of what what a wombat actually looked like. So again, it was this convenience that was amazing, but not necessary at the time. Slowly, computers and the things that we rely on have moved from a convenience factor of not necessary to necessary. And I think that really started when we started connecting these things to the internet. Internet connections allowed you to do all sorts of fun things with computers. It allowed you to talk to each other. It allowed you to solve more interesting problems. The issue with Encarta, and one of the things that I had the pleasure of meeting a person that worked on the Encarta team once, and she said to me that one of the biggest challenges that they had with building Encarta was deciding what did and did not make the cut for material on the disks. There was a finite amount of information that they could put on the CDs. And if they added more CDs, that would drive up the cost and the storage requirements, and they couldn't do that either. So they had to meticulously decide what went in and what went out of this content. But now with the internet, you had an infinite amount of information at your fingertips. It was amazingly convenient. And it built a lot of convenient things. And I'm going to pick on one particular example for a few minutes, which is banking. A lot of people, today, that image on the right, you see that thing. I don't think most people going in or coming out of high school have any idea what that is, unless maybe their parents told them. We balanced checkbooks. Balancing checkbooks was a huge pain. You had to meticulously, line by line, keep track of every transaction that you made with your checkbook. You could do it by phone, too. You could call the bank. You could enter your information. They would tell you how much is in your account, but then they charge for it because they expected you to be able to balance a checkbook. Now, we don't do that. We open an app and look at our checking account. We open an app and we move money between our accounts. We don't have to wait for banking hours. We just move money around. It's amazingly convenient. And this is an example of what I think is a convenience that we have become utterly dependent on. And that's a good thing. Balancing a checkbook is a very error-prone process. If you miss a line, you might overdraft. That's not a great thing. Having software take care of it has been a huge accomplishment for a lot of people and makes businesses easier to operate. We've become deeply dependent in online banking. In fact, it's kind of funny to say that, 15 years ago, online banking didn't exist. And if you asked me to do all of my banking today without online banking, I would struggle a lot. I don't know if I'd be able to really do all the ins and outs of it. It's like, okay, I need to mail this check to this creditor for my house. And I need to mail this check to, I don't know, let's say my credit card company. Let's say I'm allowed to have a credit card. And I need to send this there, and I need to know exactly when my pay stub will clear, et cetera, et cetera. It's a convenience that we've all become very accustomed to. And if we take it away, a lot of people aren't happy, and that becomes kind of a issue with software and reliability that we talk about all the times. When people's online banking or when their banking doesn't work at all, people get pretty upset. And I just did a quick scan of Twitter to see when the last time a bank went out, and I think that bottom tweet on that screenshot sums it up pretty well. People getting stranded at the register, unable to buy food and gas, or etc. People are deeply dependent on banking and online banking, even though it was something that didn't really exist too long ago. And when you think about the convenience that online banking affords us, it is a huge convenience that we get out of it. But a core concept with convenience is usually there's some sort of risk in adopting any kind of convenience. And online banking is, a terrific example of, kind of this interesting how much risk we accept with online banking. Getting online banking wrong leads to a very disastrous scenario for a lot of people with wiped bank accounts, identity theft, not having the money that you depended on, loss of income, dealing with years of credit repairs and things like that. It's a very frustrating and difficult thing to deal with when your identity or when online banking goes wrong, or if your checking account gets wiped out. And when you actually stand back and think about what is stopping you, what is stopping this from happening, it's something like passwords. And it sounds kind of crazy when you start thinking about it. People are assuming a huge amount of risk for something that is convenience. But evidence has shown us time and time again, people will, put up a lot of risk for something that gives them some convenience, and a convenience that we didn't have too long ago. So online banking usually gets a bad rap for bad password requirements. Like, I scanned a couple of online banks, and they said your password needs to be between 8 and 32 characters, 8 and 20 characters. Your password can't contain symbols. Your passwords are case insensitive, things like that. And it sounds, again, kind of nuts that the only thing standing between you and huge financial problems is 8 letters on a keyboard. That's it. If somebody guesses those 8 letters on your keyboard, that's a big problem for you. And you think about, like, well, wait a second, how did we do this, 10, 15 years ago when online banking didn't exist? So it's an interesting fact that, the more that we depend on these conveniences, the more risk that we're assuming. And maybe we give up some other certain risks as well. Doing banking by phone is also problematic. But time and time again, I think, if you actually step back and look at it, humans or people, we are notoriously bad at assessing risk when we are faced with a new convenience. And while, me or some other people, and maybe my family, because I kind of rub off on them, but many people never really even question, the risk that's involved. Some people just grew up with it. People, that are, entering high school today, they grew up in an era of online banking. The idea that there are ways to bank other than online banking is strange and foreign to them. They never even step back to think, is the risk worth online banking? So I'm not here to talk you out of online banking. What I'm trying to present is that we are taking additional risks for a convenience, but it is a convenience that today I couldn't really give up. It's a convenience that I've come to depend on. And that's largely what computers and software give us, convenience. I don't need a computer to play video games. It's just very convenient. I don't need a computer to do online banking, and I don't need online banking. It's just extremely convenient to do so. I don't need a computer to do word productivity and text processing, but using a typewriter is extremely difficult. So if you take away all of the conveniences that a computer offers, there's really no way I could get anything done in a given day. I couldn't, print something out on a typewriter and fix all the mistakes and get it in the mail by the time the mailman came. That would be difficult for me. So I picked on online banking a lot, but online banking is actually an interesting case where they assume a lot of the responsibilities for risk. They have excellent fraud prevention and identification. And banks, fortunately, they have legislation on their side on some matters. A good example of that is the chip and pin processing that we're starting to do with credit cards and debit cards. So we're getting there with that, and banking is getting a little bit better, but there are some other cases where convenience still wins out. There are some retailers, I think a famous one right now is Amazon. Most of the time when you use a credit card online, it will always ask you, what are the 3 or 4 digits on the back of the card, the CVV2 number or whatever that particular card issuer calls it. Amazon is an interesting case of where they will never ask for that number. And you think, well, why is that? Don't they have to ask for it? And the answer is no. They don't have to ask for that. What it does is it provides additional assurance that you are the cardholder. But what Amazon found is it's easier for them to just eat the loss of fraud than to inconvenience people by asking for that 3-digit number for every transaction or for even setting up an initial credit card, because asking for that number inconvenienced user and it led to them not making a purchase. So Amazon is, again, they're assuming some risk on behalf of users by not fully asking for all of the identification for a credit card. The downside is for software development and for myself is most of us aren't banks. So banks, they're usually large businesses. They have legislation on their sides. They have insurance. They have a lot of things that they have to do. They have compliance. They have things like Sarbanes-Oxley that they have to comply with that makes things better for them. They have excellent fraud programs and such. But for the rest of us, that kind of leaves me wondering a lot of questions when it comes to software security and the security industry, more or less. And that's really, where does the responsibility for all of this security problems and concerns that we've been seeing in the news lie? And I've come to the conclusion that culturally, organizations or businesses or whatever you want to call them, we're not very good at this. And that's usually because there is a misaligned perspective within the organization. And not all organizations have this problem, but most of them do. And most of them need to work to maintain a consistent perspective. And when I mean perspective, I mean something about, who is responsible. If you ask the engineers, they may just tell you, well, I'm a coder. I just build what I get told to build. It's not my responsibility if management asks me to build something bad. And if management wants security, they should hire security. And, project managers, they might say, like, well, I just assume engineers know how to do security properly. I didn't know I had to ask for security. Project managers may not say, hey, I need you to make it performant. They just assume you're going to build it performant, so they assume you're going to build it securely. They assume that developers are good at security. And they didn't write the bug. Is it really their fault? And project management may ultimately say, hey, I just built what senior leadership told me to build. Senior leadership might have a different perspective. They might say, well, I'm the big picture. It's not a detail for me. I shouldn't have to say it has to be secure. I just, provide, vision and a little bit of guidance, and I assume that the cogs in the machine will build something securely. Or security is, it's important, but if it slows down my MVP program, then it's going to be an issue. And I can't really sell security. Again, selling intangible features is very difficult, and it unfortunately leads to this idea that it's not necessary. You can't go toe-to-toe with a competitor and say we're faster or we're more secure. usually because end users don't really know that the competitor is any less fast or any more insecure. They just assume everything is great by default. And then finally, there's very little legislation about software security on the books right now. Senior leadership may say, well, it's not illegal. We'll get it fixed. We're going to inconvenience people. But don't worry, we have cyber insurance. We'll give the people credit card monitoring if something bad happens. End users have a completely different perspective. They don't know who should be responsible. They just know that somebody should be responsible. And if they knew more about these kinds of things, that the product was insecure, they wouldn't buy it. But they just assume everything is, and they don't know. End users think it should be illegal to build insecure software and things like that. So you have different perspectives on software security. I'm going to break from this for just a second because I want to circle back around to a related but different subject, and then I'm going to try and bring them together, and hopefully it will make sense. The last time I went to a grocery store, I entered in my phone number so I could save 57 cents on a few rolls of toilet paper. And that's something that's been going on for a very long time. Membership rewards cards, big box retailers that have membership requirements, asking for your zip code and things like that. And you might be kind of wondering where I'm going with this and what it has to do with what I talked about. And what I kind of want to start this conversation with is that privacy is often misunderstood with security. And unfortunately, an issue that we keep running into is being anonymous does not go very well with security. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So I was talking earlier about these rewards programs. What does that have to do with privacy? Well, there's a reason why retailers want you to be part of a membership rewards program. There's a reason why they want to have your zip codes. And that's because they want to know more about you. They want to understand more about their customers so that they can tie everything together. And what that really kind of comes down to is they just want to know everything about you so that they can figure out what is best for the business for their customers. A excellent example of that, and this has been a warring debate online about privacy and how it affects you as a consumer, might be that airline ticket prices will fluctuate depending what browser you use or what kind of computer you have. A airline ticketing company may show you more expensive airline tickets if you browse ticketing from an iPad because they know you can afford an iPad, which is a luxury item. If you do airline ticket browsing from an old computer that runs, Internet Explorer 10, they might show you lower fare first because they realize you probably don't have a lot of free income to spend on whatever you'd like. And they will be less aggressive about putting a more priced tickets up front. And when people find out about that, they get upset. They're like, well, wait a second. I paid more for airline tickets because I didn't look through all of the prices and you just showed me the pricier ones first, even though I selected sort by price order. And that gets people upset. I just spent $300 more because you knew I had $300 more, not because the value of the ticket was $300 more compared to any other ticket. And that's really why a lot of people ask for these kinds of things, and we don't really think about it. The last time I paid for gas at a gas station, I had to enter my my zip code. And when I say why does being anonymous doesn't go with security and how are they at odds? Well, the gas station asks for the zip code because they want to authorize the credit card. But as a bonus to the gas station, they know my zip code, so they know where I'm coming from. They know my billing zip. So if I drive down Highway 95 and I'm in South Carolina and I enter in my billing zip from Virginia, they know that I'm from Virginia. And now all of a sudden, gas stations which have a network of hundreds or thousands of gas stations, have an understanding of where people are going from and how they can price pumps appropriately. Have you ever wondered why a gas station may have an identical gas station a quarter of a mile down the road, but it's inexplicably 25 cents cheaper per gallon? Even though they're the same gas station, it's the same gas, it's on the same road. It's because the gas stations have an incredible amount of data on people and understanding where people will pay for something and where they won't. And a lot of people don't really think about this. So what? You know how much lettuce I buy in a month. What's the big deal? But with enough data points, you can figure out some interesting information. How big is your family? You can take a guess on what kind of food you're buying. How old are your kids? Are you buying baby food? Great, you have a newborn. We can use that information to try and sell and market you more information about your kid. It can give you a general idea of income. Do you splurge on groceries? Special dietary needs. I just threw that one out there because I can't eat peanuts, and I bet somehow, somewhere, somebody would find that statistic on me interesting and would probably try to sell me something. Location is another one. Who cares if you know where I am? Well, are you having an affair? Where's your kid go to school? Where's your address? Where's your workplace? And you might not think about it. It's kind of, okay, great. You know where I work. It's on my business card too. No one cares. So I listed 8 data points there, and that doesn't sound like a lot. And now imagine that some companies have not 8 data points, not 100 data points, but thousands or tens of thousands of data points on you. All of a sudden, they can paint a very good picture of what kind of person you are. And that makes people feel uncomfortable. And they don't know that it's going on. Most people don't really understand how much information we have on them when we collect this kind of data. And we may not even be collecting some of this data intentionally. But so it's not individual data points, and that's unfortunately where we tend to get fixated and where we tend to look at things like, well, we're only collecting their zip code. That's not sensitive information. Well, that depends. A first name and a last name plus a zip code is usually enough information to uniquely identify somebody. There are not very many Kevin Joneses that live in the same zip code. If there are, it's a handful of them. And I happen to have one of the most boring names possible. Most people, or a lot of people, I should say, have more unique names. So a name plus a zip code is basically a good way of uniquely identifying who you are. Same thing with your zip and your and the last 4 of your card. So this data can be enough that they actually have a decent understanding of where you're driving and where you're going. Great. The last 4 of my card at a gas station, and my zip. Now, all of a sudden, if you know my zip, you probably have a decent idea of what the median income is where I work. And then you can use that to figure out how to price things more appropriately. And again, to some people might think, who cares? It's good that you can price things better based on understanding your customers better. But what it really comes down to is we're amassing these huge buckets of data without fully understanding what it means to have the data. And then what happens when we accidentally lose the data because of a breach or something like that. And I'm going to ask the same question that I asked 10 minutes or so ago. Where does the responsibility of this lie? Engineers don't feel particularly responsible for the amount of data that we collect. They just get a requirement, hey, we need to start capturing the user's middle initial. Well, middle initial sounds okay. But again, we don't think in big picture because it's hard. We don't think, okay, well, first name, middle name, last name, plus some other identifier. Now you've got an extremely good chance of uniquely identifying something because we don't look at things from the data set perspective. And those that do look at it from the perspective of a data set tend to think about, well, okay, we've got all of this data on this person, now how can we monetize it? I'm going to show this slide again, except a little bit different. This should be a familiar conversation that we just had. So you'd think with all of the concerns that we've had with, security since we started doing connecting things to the internet, and since we started understanding that we're collecting data and we're not very good at understanding what it means to collect that data, and so far I haven't given you any information that's demonstrably bad about what it is we're doing, and that's intentional. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm trying to get people thinking, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's interesting that we keep having these discussions about uncertainty and doubt and no clear responsibilities in an organization about how we are going to manage it. So you'd think, with all of that, you would think that we might say, well, let's step back and let's think. We have been doing this, for since the early 1990s, for better or for worse, and we need to slow down on this and get our heads around what it means to be safe on the internet, what privacy means, and what collecting all this data means, and how we can keep our customers secure. You would think that's how we think, but we don't. We've gone from a convenience opportunity of it's convenient to do word processing to it's convenient to do online banking, and now we've just started putting computers in everything. And for better or for worse, and I'll be honest, the allure of some of these smart technologies or Internet of Things is alluring in some ways. Bulbs, maybe. I've never found a particularly compelling reason to get an internet-connected light bulb, but they exist. This one's been less compelling for me. Smart toasters. I don't know why it exists. I can only assume it exists because it can. We've gone from technology existing to solve conveniences to solving problems that don't exist. And earlier I was talking about, trading off conveniences for assuming some risk. But now we've recently started building technology with no clear convenience, but we are still assuming that risk. I don't know why I need a smart toaster, but I do know, given that photo and what I read about that smart toaster, there is an app for it, and that app collects your email address, and it collects all sorts of information. So now I've just assumed a lot of risk for a convenience that I don't seem to clearly benefit from all that much, other than, let's see here, if I look at that, it can tell me that my toast is done in 24 seconds. Which doesn't sound like something that I would want to risk my personal details for. But remember earlier we said people just don't think about it. They see a smart toaster and they think, oh, it's convenient. They don't stop and think about the risk that that we started to assume when we started building things like this. So what's the harm in all of this kind of stuff? Well, these devices, they get hacked. And that's maybe not a detriment to you exactly, but the more technology we build and the more that it's able to be broken into, it can be used for nefarious purposes. There's been multiple instances where internet-connected things have not been used, have not been broken into to break them or to do something malicious to you, but because they have been used to carry out other malicious attacks on other computers. These are the basis of something called a botnet, where, okay, great, my light bulb's been compromised, but as long as it goes on and off, I don't care. But now a attack on other people's homes and other people's technologies is being done from a light bulb in your house or a toaster. And they leak privacy. But it is all in the interest of convenience marching forward. And I want to start making the point that I think we have started reaching the point where convenience is not clearly outweighing the risks that we're assuming, like something good like online banking. So how do we fail at this? What has gone wrong? So far, you've just said some bad things, Kevin. What's gone wrong? Well, this should probably upset people. This made the rounds a few years ago about internet-connected baby monitors. Turns out there's no security on them, and if you just know the IP address for it, you can look at somebody's kid. That's disturbing. And it shouldn't exist like this. And somebody somewhere in this world thought building a product like that was okay. Or maybe you had the Facebook Messenger app installed on your Android phone. Well, it turns out Facebook uploaded a copy of every text message you've ever sent and received and every call log that you've ever had, all in the interest of Facebook understanding their customers better. Or a teddy bear that records a voice and plays back messages. How could that possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out they were all uploaded to a database that had no password protection on it whatsoever. So now any voice recordings that have ever been made on that particular Internet of Things toy have now been just leaked to the world. And of course, when it gets found out about, the data is hoarded and it's, you know, there on the internet forever. The internet never forgets. And we just keep failing. Amazon explains how Alexa recorded a private conversation and sent it to another user. This happened earlier this year, and it was an actual issue that happened where an Alexa recorded a conversation between a couple and then sent it to a friend. And you might think, how can that possibly be? They must have misconfigured it. It must have been a bug or something like that. And that's where I think adversaries become an interesting discussion. It's something that most people don't necessarily think about all the time. When I say adversaries, I don't mean hackers. Sometimes I do mean hackers. But it might also be rushing to market with poor understood uses of technology or poor usability. That Facebook issue where Facebook was siphoning off text messages, was that a usability error? Was that an issue with the phone not making it clear that that was going on? Was that an issue with Facebook not being upfront enough with their customers? Should it have been technically possible for the Facebook app to do that? Interesting. And in the case of Alexa, this was clearly just a case of machine learning and artificial intelligence gone wrong. These are new technologies that, frankly, we don't really understand, but in a rush to get everything out and say we're first, we've started rushing them to the market. There's been lots of research about machine learning and adversarial input. This is an interesting paper where you show a image recognizer, a picture of a panda. It thinks it's a panda with almost 60% confidence. Mix it with just the right information that looks completely like random noise to you and I. Now all of a sudden the machine learning algorithm thinks the panda is a gibbon with 99% confidence. And you and I can plainly tell that panda plus noise does not equal gibbon. But machine learning does not do that. And unfortunately, machine learning is an excellent example of not being good at adversarial input. And that's where the Alexa case failed with voice recognition. It mistook complete gibberish for a command to record the conversation and then send it to a friend. At least that is Amazon's explanation. And that is a little concerning, especially considering that I have an Alexa about 2 feet away from me, although I did turn the mic off. It plays music. I'm assuming the risk because I want to hear music. I don't say anything interesting anyways. So what am I really driving at with all of this? Which, I think we're entering a point where consumers are starting to get a little bit worried about what's going on. 90s, early 2000s, blind trust worked. You could sign up for online banking and have a decent idea that the technology was being done securely and with good intentions. And people aren't really sure about that anymore. And they're starting to become much more skeptical about technology, which they should be. But unfortunately, it's not happening fast enough. So we are continuing to produce, frankly, garbage technology when it comes to security and privacy. And the only recourse that consumers have is regulation. A lot of people say vote with your dollar, but that's a hard thing when things, are perceived as necessities or other technology or things like that, especially with things that are built into the computer. But we see regulations starting to pop up. GDPR came out in early 2018, which has a massive effect on members of the European Union. The interesting thing about GDPR is if you are an American company that operates somewhere in the EU and it affects EU customers, people, you are still affected by GDPR. In California, Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 aims to achieve something to GDPR. And it doesn't go into effect until 2020 so that businesses have time to prepare. But California is trying to push things forward so that businesses and software engineers and things and the whole process of building software are more aware of what it is that they're trying to build. And regulators are struggling with this too. Not very many people understand completely how everything works. I certainly don't. I know that certain data gets collected, but I don't know how one of those data sets is sold and traded. So it leads to broad regulation or regulation that is too difficult to comply with and causes businesses to struggle to implement compliance or stop doing business in the EU entirely, which happened for several businesses with GDPR. They just decided, well, we're not going to do business in EU anymore because we can't do it. Which may or may not be a good thing. Maybe they can't meet the GDPR requirements and it's best that they don't operate there anymore. But we're probably going to see more legislation in the area than not, especially from across the globe. Maybe not so much from the federal government in the United States, but we're probably going to see more of it come out of the other areas that are starting to recognize that putting cameras on the internet with zero protection that are expected to be pointed inside of a crib, maybe we should intervene and stop that from happening because consumers can't make those kinds of choices. And the only way that to protect the consumer from those kinds of things is regulation. So what can we do? What are we gonna do about this? I'm primarily a software engineer, and I work with other software engineers. And I would say stay in and be aware of your comfort zones. As far as what I mean by that, I mean be skeptical about what other people say and what else is going on in your organization. And be aware of data that's being collected and security within your own software and products. It's very easy for a manager to be dismissive and say, we don't have to worry about that. Why? Why not? Be aware of your own comfort zones. Try not to take guesses and things like that. It's very easy for a software engineer to say, yeah, of course it's secure. We thought about it, so it must be secure. Well, you'd be surprised. I get security wrong all the time. It's something that you have to be aware of. What is your comfort zone and what it isn't? There are certain aspects of security that I'm not very good at, or at least I wouldn't consider myself an expert and would be willing to be placed in the hot seat of, is this right or not? I would say brace for regulation. It's going to happen, and it's going to keep happening probably. And brace for accountability. This is something that I think a lot of people are struggling with right now. Is the penalty for exposing information to the internet or leaking it or privacy problems has been very gentle for a while. especially in the United States. But the FTC has been more involved in some of these issues. I think everyone is aware, probably, of the Equifax hack that happened. Gosh, it seems like 20 years ago now, but it wasn't. It was only probably about a year or two ago. There was probably no significant impact on Equifax that I'm aware of off the top of my head. They are still a business. They are still in business. They will always be in business. I'm not aware of any huge fines levied on them. Maybe some people lost their jobs, but the penalties have been fairly low. And I envision that at some point the accountability is the only way that those things are going to continue to improve, is when somebody's actually had their feet held to the fire on getting it fixed. I don't think that we are very good at asking for help organizationally and asking for input from third parties or getting audits. Most of the times that those kinds of things do happen, it's because existing regulation requires it for us. Yes, you need to get a HIPAA audit. Yes, you need to get a PCI audit. But how many businesses go out of their way just to get a test on their software if there is no perceived huge value in it? Like, probably not very good. And I'm basing that mostly on speculation. But again, my experience leads me to believe that most organizations do not rely on outside help unless they are either motivated by an enterprise customer that demands an external audit, or because they are legally bound to do it, not because they are thinking the best interest of their users, unfortunately. And respect users and your customers' trust. They are giving the data to you because they think they need to give it to you. They don't anticipate the data being sold off in chunks to other people to aggregate more data, to have more data, and more data and more data to understand who you are, to do better marketing and better targeted advertising. So collecting data is not a bad thing. It's what you do with the data that's a bad thing. It's how long you store it that's a bad thing. Do you need to store a user's zip code indefinitely? Probably not. Do you need to store everything indefinitely? Probably not. And those are the things that GDPR is trying to get fixed. We have horrible data retention policies. We keep data forever because data storage is cheap. Why not? Well, because it's a liability. And I think that is a thinking aspect that organizations, businesses are slowly starting to come around to. Several years ago, I remembered attending a conference. It wasn't a security conference, I think it was a big data conference around the idea that the leaders of technology are going to be the ones that have all the data and know all the data about the customers. And I think we've started coming around to the idea that data is a liability and you should hang on to it for only as long as necessary. Be a vigilant consumer. That one's hard for me. I don't have a great feeling of how to be a consumer, especially when it's put in the context of sometimes I'm just a normal person too. Good example is connecting to a public Wi-Fi spot. A lot of people tell you should not use public Wi-Fi because it's insecure. If you do use public Wi-Fi, you need to use a VPN. That's true. Maybe. There's a lot of discussion around that. But also, sometimes you have a screaming 4-year-old that really wants to watch a YouTube video, and that's the easiest way to get it done. And never feel too small or too big to make issues. If you're a developer, a junior developer, and you think this doesn't seem right from a security or a privacy perspective, say something. If you think you're too big to be in those kinds of weeds, don't. I think we need to, having the correct mindset is it can't be pushed up from the bottom or pushed down from the top. It needs to be an organizational value, but it has to start somewhere. So start somewhere and raise some discussions. All right. Well, that just about ends my part there. Anyone have any feedback, questions?
Let's see. We got a question from Mr. Joel Cochran. How do you think of these issues for companies whose business is the data itself?
That's actually a really hard question to answer, because some businesses are in the business of data. At that point, the best thing that you can be aware of is being transparent with your users as much as possible about what it is that you're doing with that data. And I guess it gets a little bit even trickier when you don't deal with consumers, when you're collecting data from other businesses and they collect the data from other businesses and they collect the other data from businesses, and then that data collects the data from a consumer. That gets hard. But there are a lot of great examples of things you can do. Okay, fine. I have to collect this private information. That's a necessary thing to do business. Don't be the people that ran an IoT bear and then had a Mongo database that was not password protected out on the internet. I think that's a legitimate thing. I mean, store the data, figure out what your data retention policies are. That's something that I think we are not very good at right now, is having data for years in cold storage and other storage. It's always kind of funny when you see these kinds of things like that. Like, I can't remember which product it was. I think it was some Adobe product. I think it was Cold Fusion or JRun. Two ancient web servers that somebody leaked the source code for one of those two things. And you think that sounds like a big deal, but wait a second. The source code was from 1992. Well, who cares? But the point is they were just hoarding this data and their source code on locations that weren't stored securely. Do you need your code from 1992? Maybe. I don't know. So yes, data collection is a necessity for a lot of people, but how do you store it and what do you do with it and who do you share it with is a big part of where I think we need to consider things more.
All right. Anyone else? Any other questions? We'll give it a second. Kevin, first, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today. That was an extremely scary talk. And
I tried not to be. It was actually way worse at the beginning.
And it could be way worse. Yeah, I'm sure there's thousands of horror stories out there about things out there on the internet that people just stumble upon. And I know the baby camera, where one of the stories was people could talk through the micro or the speaker on the camera. So someone reported someone's hacked my baby camera and people are talking to my baby while my baby's sleeping, and throw it out the window.
Yeah,
just destroy it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is what I think is going to make it harder for consumers. Finding a non-internet connected baby monitor these days that just relies on good old RF with 30-foot range, that's getting harder and harder to do. And there's something to be said against unprotected RF, but at that point, the only thing you have to worry about is proximity, and chances are your neighbors aren't going to just try and sniff RF signals from a baby monitor. But that's again where I think consumers are being forced to make choices that I don't think are good for them.
I forgot what it was I was looking at, but I was talking about the technology and a lot of these internet connected devices and a lot of stuff that's coming over from China that's being mass produced. And one of the things they were talking about was that the technology's there to do low power internet connected devices, but there's not enough processing power to do any sort of security or authentication on these same chipsets. So in order for most internet connected devices to become more secure, to add some layer of security, it would take away too much from battery performance. And if you had to charge these devices, it would just kill the performance of these things drastically.
Yeah, that is a true criticism, and that is an excellent point where cryptography is not cheap on CPUs, especially the super low power one, like an ARM Cortex Zero. I think can generate one RSA key in like 10 seconds. It's horrible in terms of security.
Wow.
Fortunately, there's a couple of things coming up that I think that will make it better. One, we're starting to build the security, these algorithms into the chips themselves, like special purpose. Two, they're still getting faster and faster every day. Three, people that are cryptographers and are much, much, much smarter than I am are specifically designing cryptographic algorithms that are meant for low power devices. Yes, they may not be as secure as the things that we use on desktop computers, but they're still good enough.
Very cool. Well, I don't see any more questions, and we're a little past the top of the hour. So this is an excellent place to stop. Again, Kevin, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And thank you to everyone who joined us live. And thank you to everyone who's watching the replay, either on YouTube or Twitch or some other means. We greatly appreciate having you all with us. And go to swiftkick.in for future episodes. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.